All right, it's time to open the C-suite. I'm Corey.
I'm Mike.
Today we're going to talk about leadership meetings, and it's a loaded term because it could be the executive leadership meeting, could be company-wide leadership meetings. It can take on a lot of different forms in organizations. So let's start out talking about the executive team and you as a CEO leading your meetings with your executive team. So when you hear about that, Mike, how do you handle that?
It's such a personal topic to me. I'll lay a scenario for you. So 2019, fall of 2019, which
Pre-COVID.
is pre-COVID, yeah, about 2 years after our Series A.
Yep.
And so at this point, we're 75 or so employees, and there's a real leadership team, right?
Yep.
I think there's maybe 7 of us on the leadership team. And this moment occurred where I just came to the realization, helped by feedback toward me, that I was running terrible executive meetings.
I mean, I'm glad people gave you the feedback at least.
And I say I was running a terrible, weekly executive team meeting. Half the time they weren't even happening because it was a low enough priority that it was like, well, it's going to be a crappy meeting anyways, and so let's all do our own operational thing. In the mindset shift for me was part of the reason I was running a bad executive team meeting was I believe that I viewed the exec team and myself as sort of like overhead to the company, right? And so if something was going wrong, we were behind on sales or something, I was more likely to want to jump into a sales call than go be in the meeting. So sometimes I would say, hey, I can't make it, whatever. You guys go have coffee or something.
Got it.
The mindset shift, I had like this drawing that I drew. At first it was like exec team up here going down to the company as overhead, and like, well, we should go down into the trenches when we can. I flipped that just in my mental model of like the exec team and the quality of then that meeting being the nucleus of that team is like the seed from which everything else, kind of spawns out of. And as soon as I made that shift, I remember finding 3 books on meetings.
Okay.
Terrible, boring books. But one had really good insight, the book Traction. It's not a commercial for Traction, which is entrepreneurial operating system. But they had this format of level 10 meeting. And as soon as I shifted to, okay, I'm going to put real effort into the format of the meeting, the prep, what everybody's expectations are. I literally brought a timer that would keep us like on the agenda and move. And when that shifted, I remember our CTO Craig saying, Mike, you went from having a bad leadership meeting to a good one. And I feel like I'm part of a stronger company. So it's a very personal topic. I'll stop with that story and we can go into it. But huge part of whether the whole company is effective or not is that leadership exec team meeting.
So there's a couple of important things you said in there. First, you believe in having a regular executive leadership meeting. I personally believe that weekly does matter. I know companies that do it less frequently than that. I'll come back to why I think it's weekly. You also talked about it being sharing across that team, right? And I think that's the really important part. For me, that executive team meeting is about the executives understanding what's going on in the other parts of their business.
Yes.
It's not about them looking good to the other executives.
Yep.
It's about what do we all need to know to get our business done.
Yes.
And then how do we, that to me is the first step in disseminating information, is that leadership team meeting.
Yes.
How do we get out, how do we find out if we're on time with this? How do we find out if we're on target with these metrics? How do we find out if the numbers are on track?
Yes.
How do we find out that, the insurance stuff is coming up and everybody's got to do something, right? That should be that executive team meeting.
Yes.
Another point you made, time invested in making the meeting work.
Right.
It's not free.
Right. No, it's not. And there's ways to find efficiency in doing that. I mean, once I had done a few with like this new format I had working, it's like, okay, this got down to a pretty good cycle. And there's a way to democratize the labor into it. And so what I liked about this like level 10 meeting format was the crux of it all is basically the issues list.
Yeah.
And it was on everybody to contribute to the issues list.
Yep.
And when we first were doing this, I was nudging that team. Hey, remember, by 3:00 Friday, put in whatever issues you're seeing. You should be doing it throughout the week. But I had to manually kind of nudge myself and others. And then my role was to go and order what I thought was the highest leverage. You got the quadrants of importance and urgency, right?
Yep.
And so I had a little score. It was like, it couldn't just be ordered by urgency. I had to have importance in there too. And then I would order the topics of what we were talking about first. And so beyond disseminating information, it's like, we have this time together. These are the minds that are seeing everything across the company. What are we rolling up our sleeves on?
Right.
And being intentional around like, hey, we're giving this topic, likely 15, 20 full minutes. and this is what we want to get out of it, and being like quite disciplined on we're talking about the most important things. Otherwise, the meeting happens by accident.
And so I have a few other adjustments I make. I was always big on numbers. I wanted up front. I want to talk about where we stood against revenue, right?
Because scorecard and OKRs for me.
Okay, it's similar. So similar, right? Where do we stand? I always was. What are the key upcoming things in the company? Do we have an upcoming board meeting where we track it on the deck as the outline of the board deck done, right? We have a company-wide meeting coming up. Where are we at with that? We got a strategy meeting coming up. Everybody have their assignments, so we know what we're doing. And then also big customer issues list, right? What any big burning customer issue, anything we got to deal with, what do we got to confront, right? Those were big elements. I did have individual teams creating their own status reports.
Okay.
And the reason I did that, and I always wanted them as tight as they can be, and they'd always go a little longer. But I wanted others to hear what were the most important things the other teams were dealing with. Inevitably, what would happen is someone would, the second person to go would say this, but I really need to know about that. Well, that person's going to cover that, right?
Yeah,
because it did matter.
Yeah.
And if those people needed to know it, somebody else in that call needed to know it and didn't realize it yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, my way of achieving that was that the OKRs, every senior, executive was the owner of at least one of the company level KRs. What we do is first you go through the scorecard, which is like the basic metrics. And it's kind of annoying, but actually read them out loud every week, so you're never forgetting. And then once it was the OKRs, it was okay. Taylor, you own this KR. Give us a status update in 2 minutes. If something had gone from like green to yellow or red, that got more time. But the format was also that it was automatically an issue. So I try to go through them fast enough that then we don't need the full story here. It's going to be talked about 15 minutes in the issues. And maybe a breakout meeting after that. But similar thing, different.
Very similar, and that format can be personal, right? I mean, that is the key thing. I find a lot of execs didn't like a weekly meeting. They felt it was.
Well, I wasn't showing up to it or canceling it, and I just think it's a mistake.
And I thought the weekly meeting was important. One, that is a group that has to work together. I was taught early in my career that early in my executive career, the executives are your peers, and your team is how you get things done. You're not a member of that team of your those that you're leading. You're a member of the executive team, and you're leading the others, right? And it matters because you are accountable to those other people around the table. They're not. And I see this with different groups, like, that person's the enemy. We don't get along with customer service, and we don't, No, you're the ones together making it. You have to be a team, and if you don't have regular time together, you'll never operate as a team. And that's where some of the little, silly social interaction and stuff happens, but it matters, those little relationships. What also matters is people need to understand more than just their part of the universe, because their actions impact others. And I can't count how many times someone was sitting there really bored on a meeting. Like, I can't believe I got to sit through this. And then somebody would say something and be like, wait, what happened? They didn't know that they needed that bit of information. Right. And so, I'm not going to say every minute of every executive team meeting is awesome.
Well, and I think one litmus test of whether you're achieving that camaraderie as an exec team is when budget conversations come up. Are folks battling over the budget lines, or are they on one team, thinking about what should we, maybe we should allocate a little more of this off of my team into product, and
Well, you're a lucky man if it happens.
I'm not saying it happens all the time. There's always still a debate. But what I'm saying is, if you don't do what you're talking about, form it as a team that is looking at everything, sort of as we're on the same team versus competing departments, then those budget conversations are way more heated.
And even strategic conversations. Where should we invest in? What should we have happen here? And to me, an exec team meeting it's grounding everyone. It's getting you on the same page, but it is escalation time. And what I'd hate is when I'd see something bubbling in Slack and I see 3 or 4 emails on it, and I'd be looking around going, okay, I don't know, which channel am I paying attention to, and so on. Let's bring it into the exec team meeting. Let's know clearly what's happening. And
my reply became, all right, paste it into the issues. Unless it needs to be talked about right now. It's Wednesday and our next meeting is Monday. All right, great. Thanks. Put it in the issues.
That's right.
Put it in the issues. And early on, I'm taking it all on myself. Oh, I've got to document all that. It's like, oh, okay, thanks. Put it in the issues. If you haven't done that, then you haven't done your shared labor of prepping the meeting.
That's right.
I'm going to Friday, 3, 4, 5 o'clock, prioritize the issues. And I may say that, hey, it's number 3, actually. I still think 1 and 2 are more important to talk about first, but put it in the issues.
And look, there's all sorts of information that comes out of those meetings that is secret. doesn't need to go to the rest of the company.
Sure. Yeah.
So I had a rule with the exec team meeting: it stays in the room, or you don't stay in the room.
Oh, it's like, yeah.
Yeah. So this information,
Good expectations.
yeah, this information is for
Right.
us. So you all should talk freely.
Yeah. Which also means don't miss the meeting.
Don't miss the meeting. But when the information leaves the room, I'm going to find out from who.
Yeah.
And you don't have a spot on this team.
Yeah.
But you want that because you want to be able to speak freely. You want to, and you see it. It's inevitable that someone has a problem and doesn't really openly want to say it because that's going to be about that person and their team, and they might take it wrong, and that's fine. You want to get to a point where you can have some of that open debate.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I didn't do a good enough job of driving the meetings to focus and dedicate as much time to the issues as we needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got a little caught up in we got to get through the checklist of things.
Yep.
The issues, the hot things of the day, the most important things coming up with the company. That's what those meetings are really for.
Yeah.
And the numbers. And why do I say the numbers? Because at the end of the day, if the numbers aren't there, none of that matters, right?
Yeah.
This should all be in service of hitting the numbers the company's got to hit.
And I'm not saying to never switch up the format.
No.
I mean, look, you have to know the pulse of the team and the environment when you're the CEO. So it might make sense to just go out to breakfast. Some weeks. I also think the exec team or senior leadership team offsites and just like working, full day, half days on the whiteboard, whatever, out in the park are so important. And doing, about 3 of those a year was typically my cadence.
Right. And so that's pulling away now. So we talked weekly exec team meetings. But then there's these type of, and it was that exec team doing strategy meetings, broader leadership team. How did you do that?
All right. So our company, like any, was evolving, right? So we grow from 75 or so when I finally, fix or take action to fix the exec team meeting. So then about 120, 125, we have this other layer of senior leadership. And I think that's where I started to struggle with you want everybody involved within that offsite because so much value comes out of it. We're rolling up our sleeves on the toughest, most important issues. We're coming up with solutions. But I started overpopulating it, I think.
Right.
I do think it's hard to be that effective when there's 13, 14, 15 people, in that setting. And so I don't have the perfect answer there, but I think keeping the exec team at the tight, whatever you have, 7, 8, maybe you have 10 people at your stage, 7 or 8 was usually my team. Keeping that to an offsite, I think, even if you're doing it in addition to the full management, is pretty important because I started skipping it and saying the offsite is going to be the wider team. It felt like something was lost there in the value we could have.
So let's break that down though. So you got weekly exec team meetings. That's for tactical day-to-day driving the business. You're using exec teams in a couple of times a year to talk strategy. Just that smaller team. Let's get out of the day-to-day. Let's talk about looking forward. I agree. Did the same thing. And then the other is a broader meeting that included more of the managers across the organization. You bring them into more strategic, again, out of the day-to-day, bring them into more strategic discussion. You
have to do that. I'm not saying don't do it with the rest of management, but doing it at the cost of getting way out of the day-to-day with your tight team is too much of a price to pay. You have to get that small team out too.
And I just caught up with a friend of mine, a gentleman who I worked with years ago, and he is at a very large company now. And he's in Chicago because his company was having the twice a year leadership meeting, right? And their corporate was here, and he was going. He's like, "Oh, it's the top 100 managers in the company, right?" And so it's all levels of company do that because you're trying to bring those people in. You're trying to get them under the hood. You're trying. What you really want is they have ownership and the information they need to make day-to-day decisions. Right, and that's why you need that. What we're also laying out here is yet again. This is more effort on the CEO or the C-suite to manage these processes because each of these meetings takes some level of preparation. But I think of it as, what is my management process for the organization? For example, I'm going to do my weekly exec team meeting. I'm going to do a weekly note to the company. I'm going to do a quarterly company-wide meeting of communication. We're going to do twice a year with the exec team. I'm going to do, and you can map that out. And then you can actually calendar it out. And you see those milestones. By the way, what shows up in my weekly management team meeting? What that calendar is and which ones of those are coming up and who's got responsibilities, right? It's not all on you. But and a lot of CEOs these days I'm seeing bring in chief of staff to help manage those type of processes, right? That's a way of doing it. But the value the organization gets on that level of communication, those clear intervals, those clear roles and responsibilities of each of those meetings, it moves smoother. And it just gets more information out into the org and makes people more loyal to the company.
Well, let me say this is a theme on both exec teams and these offsites or leadership meetings talking about. At least in moments, you are wanting to make the company that continues to get larger feel small again. Especially when you're growing from being a startup. And I'm not saying it's the same people when you were the first 10
Yeah.
to now you're 10-person leadership team, but now you're 100 plus people. Like that leadership team, that exec team, if you can facilitate the right, it's not like every day, but the right meetings and cadence to where we feel like we're actually a small, tight knit team at some level. It's so important.
I think back, so I'm an old guy, back in the 90s when I was, young guy, first in management, getting invited to an executive meeting in Beaver Creek, Colorado. And it was there was 50, 70 people from the company there. And it was, the company had grown to thousands at that point. And, just the invite mattered. Right. And then you got to have drinks with some people you don't talk to all the time. Right. And it matters to those people. And you forget that when you're the executive, that it probably matters to somebody here in a way that you don't realize anymore because you're not there anymore.
Yeah. That's a whole nother thing on this. So once you have the cadence down and you have like your exec meetings on the rails, as I always say, what a great avenue to then invest in leader development
talent
by, maybe it's not the whole meeting, but hey, so-and-so, that thing that happened this week, love for you to come in and be the one to speak to this company level AR because of the experience you just had.
That's right.
And you filtered, you kind of rotate that here and there. I do the same with board meetings. And it's just a great way to have the exposure, the growth moment, the kind of adrenaline. But if you don't have your meetings on the rails,
that's right.
You're never gonna miss all those opportunities.
That's right. I mean, a great example, last company I was at, we had a big government part of our business and we had to go through big government certification. On a regular basis, the guy who ran that certification process came in and reported to the exec team on what's going on because it touched most parts of the company. Now, a lot of the execs knew everything going on. Not everybody did.
Right.
And did the head of HR need to know? Yeah, because sometimes people would ask her, what do you think's going on with that? Is that going as well as you think?
Right.
And her knowing, people were looking at her as a confidant in the company and she'd be like, yeah, I just heard up about that. It's going well.
Yeah.
So
well, different ways to do it, right?
That's right. And there is no right way, but you have to do it.